In the early 1990s, the Internet was a silent, invisible universe. It was a sterile landscape reserved strictly for academics, military contractors, and text-only commands. There were no colors, no images, and no corporate logos. To navigate this digital wilderness required memorizing complex Unix architecture and typing raw terminal strings. The World Wide Web existed only as a brilliant theoretical framework. It was a collection of static document servers waiting for a spark to ignite into a consumer revolution. That spark was struck at the University of Illinois, inside the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. Here, a subterranean lab of young coders worked past midnight. Among them was a 22-year-old programming prodigy named Mark Andreessen. He looked at the flat text of the early Internet and envisioned a visual frontier. Alongside co-developer Eric Bina, Andreessen began writing code for a radical new interface. They named their experimental project NCSA Mosaic. Mosaic changed everything by introducing a simple, revolutionary feature. For the first time in history, images could display inline right next to the text. Suddenly, the Internet had a face. Users no longer needed to download files separately. They could point, click, and instantly explore a visual landscape. Released as a free download in 1993, Mosaic swept across university campuses like wildfire. The web was expanding exponentially, and the public was notice. The sudden explosion caught the eye of Jim Clark, a legendary Silicon Valley titan. Clark had recently left Silicon Graphics and was hunting for the next big shift. Clark recognized that Andreessen hadn't just built software, he had unlocked a $1 trillion consumer market. In early 1994, the two men joined forces. With Clark's millions and Andreessen's vision, they formed Netscape Communications. They quickly hired the brilliant young engineers who had built the original browser. Operating out of a cramped startup office in Mountain View, the atmosphere was chaotic. The team lived on pizza, working around the clock to rewrite the browser from scratch. They needed to build a professional version that was faster, more stable, and capable of dominating commercial enterprise networks globally. Because the university held the rights to the name Mosaic, the startup rebranded. They drew inspiration from a mythical Internet beast, naming the company Netscape. In October 1994, they released Netscape Navigator 0.9 beta to the world. It was a masterpiece of 1990s Internet engineering. Navigator was a massive technological leap forward. It loaded web pages up to 10 times faster than older browsers by rendering text before downloading images. For a world trapped behind slow, screeching dial-up connections, this optimization felt like absolute magic to the everyday consumer. Netscape's growth strategy was simple, yet incredibly disruptive. They made Navigator free to download for personal use, allowing it to spread globally instantly. Within just 4 short months of its commercial release, Netscape Navigator captured a staggering 75% of the global browser market share. The classic ship's wheel logo became the universal symbol for stepping onto the information superhighway, transforming the company into a household name. Corporate America realized that if you didn't have a website optimized for Netscape, your business was effectively invisible to the new digital economy. Silicon Valley venture capitalists watched in awe as Netscape single-handedly transformed the web from a hobbyist playground into a commercial gold rush. As the user base climbed into the millions, CEO Jim Barksdale was brought in. He was a seasoned executive tasked with turning Internet hype into corporate revenue. Barksdale brought discipline to the chaotic startup, restructuring sales pipelines to target massive Fortune 500 licensing agreements. But behind the scenes, Netscape was racing against a ticking clock. They knew they were operating in a vacuum that wouldn't stay empty for long. By mid-1995, Netscape Navigator had become the primary window through which the entire human race viewed the expanding digital universe. The staggering pace of adoption caught the attention of Wall Street banks, who smelled the birth of an entirely new asset class. Investment bankers convinced Jim Clark to take the company public, despite the startup having never turned a single dollar of net profit. On August 9, 1995, Netscape launched its historic initial public offering. It was a day that would fundamentally change the global financial landscape forever. The stock was initially priced at $28 per share. Within minutes of the opening bell, institutional buying pressure sent the price skyrocketing. The stock peaked at a breathtaking $75 a share before closing out its first trading day at an unbelievable $58. A company that barely existed a year prior was suddenly valued at nearly $3. By the summer of 1995, the meteoric rise of Netscape had sent shockwaves straight to Redmond, Washington. The empire of Microsoft was suddenly facing an existential threat. For years, Bill Gates had dismissed the Internet as a passing fad for academics. He believed the real power would always reside entirely within the desktop operating system. But Netscape's 90% market share proved that the operating system was becoming a secondary detail. The web browser was the new desktop interface. If Netscape controlled the browser, they could eventually control the software ecosystem, rendering Microsoft Windows completely irrelevant to the future of computing. On May 26, 1995, Bill Gates penned a historic, urgent internal memo to his executive staff. He titled it, simply, "The Internet Tidal Wave." In the memo, Gates declared that the Internet was the single most important development since the birth of the personal computer itself. He ordered a massive, immediate pivot across every single department at Microsoft. Every product they built had to be re-engineered around the web. Microsoft was notorious for entering markets late, but using its massive scale to crush competitors. They prepared to deploy the full weight of their monopoly. They frantically licensed the source code of the old NCSA Mosaic browser, the very same code Mark Andreessen had helped write years prior. Working around the clock, a specialized team of Microsoft engineers rushed to turn that licensed code into a proprietary product, Internet Explorer 1.0. On August 24, 1995, Microsoft unleashed Windows 95, backed by a staggering $300 million marketing campaign that completely captured global media attention. They paid the Rolling Stones millions to use their hit song, "Start Me Up," for television commercials, turning an operating system launch into a cultural phenomenon. Huge lines formed outside electronic stores at midnight, with everyday consumers frantically trying to buy a software upgrade that promised a brighter digital future. But hidden deep inside the retail boxes of the Windows 95 Plus pack was Microsoft's hidden weapon against Netscape, Internet Explorer 1.0. Unlike Netscape Navigator, which cost corporate clients money to license, Microsoft made a radical and disruptive decision. Internet Explorer was completely free. Bill Gates wasn't trying to make money directly off the browser. He wanted to destroy Netscape's business model by changing the market value of software to zero. Microsoft then used its massive desktop monopoly to force personal computer manufacturers like Compaq, Dell, and Gateway into restrictive, aggressive licensing agreements. If a manufacturer wanted to sell a computer with Windows 95 pre-installed, Microsoft legally forced them to place the Internet Explorer icon directly on the desktop. Even worse for Netscape, Microsoft banned these computer builders from hiding the IE icon or pre-installing Netscape Navigator out of the box. In a ruthless corporate maneuver, Netscape's primary distribution method was completely severed, cut off directly at the factory assembly line before computers ever reached consumers. By 1996, the skirmishes had officially ended, and a brutal, multi-billion-dollar war of attrition began between Redmond and Mountain View. Microsoft's strategy was no longer just about catching up to Netscape. It was about completely cutting off their rivals' air supply. Because Microsoft was a massive, highly diversified monopoly, they could afford to lose billions of dollars by giving their browser away for free indefinitely. Netscape, on the other hand, was a standalone software company that relied heavily on browser licensing fees to pay its engineers and survive. In late 1996, Microsoft unleashed Internet Explorer 3.0, marking the first time their browser was technically on par with Netscape Navigator. IE3 introduced support for CSS and multimedia, proving to the tech industry that Microsoft could innovate just as fast as an agile startup. To force adoption, Microsoft aggressively bundled the new browser into every copy of Windows, weaponizing their near 100% operating system market share. Web developers suddenly found themselves trapped in a grueling crossfire, forced to build two completely separate versions of every single website. If a feature worked beautifully on Netscape Navigator, it would often completely crash or freeze on a user running Internet Explorer. The Internet became a heavily fragmented landscape, notoriously littered with countless digital banners reading, "This site is best viewed in Netscape Navigator." In 1997, Microsoft took its integration strategy to a controversial extreme by welding Internet Explorer directly into the core code of Windows 98. The browser was no longer just an optional program, it was now deeply woven into the very fabric of the operating system's file explorer. If a computer user tried to uninstall or delete Internet Explorer, the entire Windows system would critically crash or refuse to boot entirely. Microsoft claimed this deep architectural coupling was a natural technological evolution designed to create a seamless user experience for the everyday consumer. In reality, it was a lethal strategic lock-in that made it nearly impossible for Netscape to win back desktop real estate. Netscape's market share began a devastating, unarrestable nosedive, plummeting from over 90% down to under 50% in record time. Desperate to fight back, Netscape's leadership realized they could no longer compete on a level playing field against the wealthiest company on earth. They began frantically assembling a massive legal dossier detailing Microsoft's anti-competitive practices and coercive factory agreements with hardware manufacturers. Netscape executives flew to Washington, D.C., taking their case directly to the Antitrust Division of the United States Department of Justice. The corporate tech battle had officially escalated beyond Silicon Valley, setting the stage for the most explosive federal antitrust trial of the century. On May 18, 1998, the battle for the web shifted from Silicon Valley boardrooms directly into a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. The United States Department of Justice, backed by 20 state attorneys general, officially filed a massive antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. The government alleged that Microsoft had illegally used its overwhelming desktop monopoly to crush competition and suffocate Netscape Navigator. Lead prosecutor David Boies prepared a meticulously organized case, treating the tech giant not as an innovator, but as an aggressive corporate bully. The centerpiece of the entire trial was a series of videotaped depositions from Microsoft's billionaire CEO, Bill Gates. To the shock of the court, Gates appeared highly combative, evasive, and dismissive of the government's legal questions. He spent hours quibbling over the definitions of basic words like compete, ask, and even the word we. The prosecution repeatedly trapped Gates on camera by playing back his combative answers directly alongside his own damning internal emails. Internal memos exposed that Microsoft executives had explicitly discussed a plan to cut off Netscape's air supply before they could grow. The public relations fallout was devastating, fundamentally transforming the image of Microsoft from a tech pioneer into a ruthless monopoly. For months, the courtroom drama gripped the entire global business sector as a parade of high-profile tech executives took the witness stand. Netscape executives testified under oath that Microsoft had used its market dominance to choke out their distribution channels and paralyze their operations. In late 1999, Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson released his highly anticipated, scathing preliminary findings of fact. The judge declared Microsoft a predatory monopoly that had repeatedly stifled innovation and deliberately harmed competitors to protect its core software empire. In June 2000, Judge Jackson handed down a historic, earth-shattering ruling. Microsoft was ordered to be broken up into two completely separate entities. One independent company would handle the Windows operating system, while the other would take control of all applications, including Office and Internet Explorer. Microsoft instantly launched a massive multi-million-dollar appeals process, sending the landmark antitrust case to a higher federal court panel. While a settlement eventually saved Microsoft from a forced corporate breakup, the legal war permanently damaged the company's aggressive momentum. Bill Gates stepped down as CEO during the chaos of the trial, handing the corporate reins over to longtime executive Steve Ballmer. Microsoft was forced into a new era of strict government oversight, forever altering its strategic playbook and opening the door for future internet giants. By the turn of the millennium, the damage to Netscape was completely irreversible, and the company was bought out by media conglomerate America Online. Under AOL's management, the legendary browser team was quietly dismantled, and Netscape Navigator's development slowed to a near-total standstill. Microsoft had won the war, and Internet Explorer achieved an absolute monopoly, controlling an unprecedented 96% of all global web traffic. With zero competition left in the market, Microsoft became highly complacent, completely freezing the development of Internet Explorer for over 5 long years. The Internet entered a stagnant dark age where security flaws multiplied, web standards froze, and alternative browser innovations were entirely suffocated. But just before Netscape was completely wiped out, its engineers made one final, desperate, and incredibly radical countermove. They took the crown jewels of Netscape's proprietary browser source code and released it completely free to the open source community. They formed a nonprofit organization named Mozilla, choosing a fire-breathing digital dinosaur mascot to represent their rebellious new internet collective. For years, volunteer open-source programmers around the globe worked through the night to completely rewrite Netscape's ancient, bloated codebase from scratch. In November 2004, the collective unleashed their ultimate weapon against Microsoft's monopoly, a lean, lightning-fast new web browser named Mozilla. Firefox exploded in popularity, capturing over 20% of the market in record time and proving that open-source software could successfully challenge an empire. The success of Firefox shook the tech industry to its core, demonstrating that consumers were desperately starved for web security, speed, and standard features. Seeing the cracks in Microsoft's armor, search engine giant Google quietly assembled an elite team of developers to build their own custom browser platform. In 2008, Google launched Chrome, a hyper-minimalist browser that eventually dethroned both Internet Explorer and Firefox to become the new king of the web. Microsoft's Internet Explorer was pushed into a permanent, humiliating market share freefall from which the legacy platform would never recover. The original browser wars completely redefined the modern economy, establishing the precedent that whoever controls the gateway to the web controls the flow of wealth. It laid the fundamental blueprint for the modern smartphone app store ecosystems, where tech giants still fight aggressively to control digital distribution. In June 2022, Microsoft officially retired Internet Explorer forever, sending the legendary controversial program directly to the software graveyard. Netscape Navigator may have been completely crushed, but its open-source DNA still quietly powers the very core of the modern interactive web. The grand blueprint of the Internet was written in the blood of the original browser wars, proving that in technology, no empire rules forever.